Well, good morning, Manna Church. Jeff Christensen here again. Welcome to part 4 of Love and the Law of God for Morning Manna. We've been talking this week about how we as Christians are called to live out the love of God, and we've recognized that there's a need to kind of cut through cultural ambiguity on this idea. So we look to Romans 13, and there we find the Apostle Paul shedding some light on this subject for us. He leads us to this point where we can adopt this definition of biblical love as being the orientation of the heart that genuinely desires, promotes, and works toward the flourishing of others. And in this passage, Romans 13, Paul gives us 2 ways in which we're called to walk out this love. The first, which we looked at on day 2, is how we live our lives to promote order and peace in society or in the community around us. And then we started looking at the second one yesterday. We're continuing to look at it today, which is this idea of how we're called to love all people at all times. Look with me at Romans 13, verses 8 and 9. Paul says, "Owe no one anything except to love each other. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. For the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in this word, you shall love your neighbor as yourself." Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. So we're throwing in verse 10 there as well. See, the moral directives that are listed here in verse 9 are literally restatements of the commandments from the Decalogue in Exodus 20, what we call the 10 Commandments. The vast majority of both Christian and Jewish scholars agree that the 10 Commandments exist in 2 groupings, or what they call 2 tables. The first grouping or table consists of the commandments regarding how we are meant to relate to God. Things like, don't have any gods before me, don't make idols, don't take God's name in vain, and so on. Now, generally, these commandments in the first table are thought to be roughly the first half of the 10 Commandments, more or less. The second table consists of commandments regarding how we are meant to relate to our fellow human beings, and that's roughly the last half of the 10 Commandments. Now, notice, all of the commandments listed in Romans 13:9 are from that second table, from that second half of the 10 Commandments, where it's all about how we relate to our fellow human beings. So Paul is listing commandments that talk about how we relate toward others. He's directly quoting that section of the 10 Commandments. But not only does Paul say here that you shall love your neighbor as yourself fulfills all of the 10 Commandments regarding how to relate to others, he also says, and any other commandment, which basically means every other commandment. All of the commandments are fulfilled in loving your neighbor as yourself. Well, how can that be? Well, it's because we're only able to love others well when we are submitted to God and in right relationship with Him. So if we're loving others well, if we're actually doing that, then it means that we're also loving God well. We're in the right place to be able to do that. Loving others well means we're committed to their flourishing. Really think about that. If you're genuinely committed to someone else's flourishing, to what's best for them, then it's impossible to live in unforgiveness toward them. It's impossible to live selfishly in relationship with them, to think ungodly thoughts about them, or to try and take from them for yourself, because your heart is oriented properly toward them. You're living to put them first before yourself. And if you're living life that way, you're walking in obedience to the Spirit of God's law. You're fulfilling it. And you're also loving God well. Now, none of this comes naturally to us. We need the gospel to work in us and change us in order for us to live this way. So, let's ask the Holy Spirit to work in us, to change us, to cause us to be people who fulfill the law by loving others well. Good to be with you today, Manna Church. Come back tomorrow for part 5 of Love and the Law of God for Morning Manna.